Welcome to the Starting SaaS podcast. My name is Michaela Richmond, and this podcast is all about creating a foundation for SaaS. Welcome to the Starting SaaS podcast. This is the very first episode, and I'm so excited to be doing this with none other than Isaac Morehouse.
I'm quite honored that you would have me on for this initial kickoff discussion. I love the podcast theme. It's such a great concept, such a great idea, and something that I think, especially younger people that have just grown up in a world of SaaS and don't even necessarily know what it is, or, it's like the fish in water that doesn't know what water is. Mm-hmm. So maybe as an older person, I can sort of paint a picture of the world before SaaS to get us going.
That's funny. Yeah. So I just got into SaaS this past year. I'm learning quickly because I kind of have to, but whenever I was looking for resources, I couldn't find that many. Like I would find a couple of articles or a couple of videos. And I remember starting a couple of podcasts and just being like, what do all of these abbreviations mean? What does everything mean? How does everything work? So I was like, okay, let me take this down a notch and make something that is useful for myself and hopefully for others. So we're going to do that today.
I love it. Learning out loud. It's the best way to do it.
Oh, yes. Okay. So first, what is SaaS?
So SaaS means software as a service. And that might sound sort of like weird, like, well, what else is software? But let me take you back to the days of old. Something that's taken for granted. But SaaS was actually a massive, massive breakthrough. If you go back to, really, it wasn't even that long ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago in some places, but certainly 15, 20 years ago, the way that companies operated in terms of their, the way they used computers and software, it actually had a lot to do with hardware. Like when people talk about, using computers in your business or computing, it used to require, like, your company or your organization would have a big computer room and have a bunch of hardware. So you'd have to hire somebody, consult with somebody. What are we going to use? We're going to use this IBM system or whatever. And they're going to come install all this stuff, okay, all this physical hardware. They're going to probably run cables throughout your whole office if they aren't already there, so that all these computers can be connected and wired together. Wi-Fi didn't even exist. If you wanted to connect, you had to have a physical wire. I used to do that, by the way. I used to install computer network cables at our businesses. And then you'd have like a full-time, like an IT team that are there, maintaining and all this hardware. But then you have the software component. And the software, the programs that are running, this was like you would have a physical disk or CD-ROM, and you would have a bit, like you'd buy a massive software package. Say you had a 50-person organization. I used to work for a nonprofit when in the pre-SaaS world. And every year they would have to buy, they'd do a license for every single user that they had, this massive software package, and it would get installed. It'd take a long time. It'd be like a whole day where you're like, okay, we're doing a new install, of the newest. And it'd be like a suite. Maybe it was from Microsoft or Blackbaud or, whoever the provider was. And there might be a couple different softwares you had, but it was mostly like you needed everything in this big suite, and it all be installed. And get this, people could connect to the internet, but mostly what they were using was the intranet at work, right? So they had a network. It was not connected to the World Wide Web. It was just of people within that organization sharing files back and forth on the one software that they had purchased for file sharing or for their database where they kept all their customer information. And these are maintained by the IT department who works at that company. If something breaks, they're the only ones that can fix it. And they've got a huge backlog all the time. The company's website was also, maintained by them. All of the data that the company had, customer data, employee data, payroll data, financial data, these were all run on software that came in a physical disk and was installed either on the central server or sometimes also individually on every single computer of every employee. And that was being stored usually on site in a big giant server in a closet somewhere. So everything was there, it was all local, and you're just connecting. It's like it's like if you stored everything on your PC and you were not connected to the internet, but then you just like everybody else was connected to that same PC in like a giant room or an office. It is really, really crazy. So what happened with SaaS was you had two big breakthroughs. Number one was you had off-site hosting. And this was made possible because of advances in, really the infrastructure of the internet, speed, bandwidth, et cetera. So now all of your like data, your storage doesn't need to be stored locally. And even your processing, right? Even like some of this stuff, which sort of came later, the things as the computer is doing its tasks, you don't need some big giant server or a local machine on site that can do that. You can do all that over the internet. And so somebody else can specialize in having a data warehouse, and you just get to be the one who uses that data in your business, right? And it can be private so that that data warehouse knows that, this data is only for this company, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so what that meant was the capacity. Think about if everything's running off of a server that you have in the closet, say your website, and we had this at the organization I worked for, you have a peak time. Let's say the president of your nonprofit, like the one I worked at, goes on national news and mentions some new study you've published. The spike in traffic is going to be insane, and your hardware has to be able to handle that. Maybe it's going to be 1,000 times what it normally is. So you have to have this hardware that can handle 1,000x spike, otherwise everything's going to crash. And then after that spike, you still have to pay for hardware that you're never going to use maybe ever again, or maybe once every couple of years if you get a similar spike, right? And the inefficiency and insanity of that. And so then you think about the ability to have everything off site. Now you can pay in a metered way. You have this massive warehouse that's like, yeah, you need more bandwidth, you need more hosting capacity, you need more. If it spikes, we'll handle it and we'll just send you a bigger bill, just like with your electricity bill, right? So it was this ongoing utility instead of this physical thing. It's like the difference in your home. If instead of hooking up to the electrical grid and just paying per month for whatever you whatever you used, if you had to have like your own little nuclear plant or coal plant at your own house, right? And maintain it all the time. That's kind of what it was like. So offsite hosting. And then the second thing was a business model change that SaaS brought through. And this was sort of a result of the ability to do all this stuff over the internet and stream it in. And that's a monthly fee business model. Instead of this massive, big annual or multi-year contract where you make a deal with some software provider to say, we will install the entire Microsoft productivity suite for 120 users, and we'll do this massive install, and it'll be on everybody's machine and our machine, and we'll pay you this huge amount, and then in 2 years, we'll have to renegotiate, blah, 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 and everything's kind of locked into that. Instead of that, you can be like, well, it's not physically installed here. It's not hosted here. It's being streamed over the internet. So we can just pay per month for whatever services we want. And what that created was an unbundling of software tools. Instead of having this massive suite that has everything in it that your company needs, from email to calendars to databases to financial stuff to payroll processing and usually they were all done pretty badly, but you needed them all to be in a suite because it was too hard to have big giant installs of different types of software, et cetera. So they were all kind of done mediocre. Now you can have all that disaggregated and unbundled. And somebody can be like, I have a software, literally all we do is run payroll once a week. That's all the software does. Super simple and clean. It's really nice. And you pay like $5 per employee per month or $1, like whatever, right? And you don't even need your IT team to support it. If you hook up, you pay your monthly fee and something breaks, you contact us, our IT team, and we fix it. You don't need anybody on site. You don't need to tap any resources for your internal IT team. This just blew the doors wide open. Because back in the day, I ran a program at this nonprofit. That was a new program, and I was like, we're going to have a blog. We're going to have our own website separate from the main site. We're going to do some different stuff. I was trying to move fast. I was not going to go to IT and get on their huge wait list for them to like launch a new site for me on our subdomain. And then every time I wanted to change, I would have to go ask them. And it was the very early days of SaaS stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to just do it myself. I'm going to go spin up WordPress and just create a WordPress site. I'm just going to buy a URL on GoDaddy and with the company credit card, and I'll apologize later if they get mad. And I'll set up the site, and then I'm going to, I'm not using their crazy Microsoft Outlook, whatever. I'm going to use Google Calendar for myself, and I'm going to flow everything into my Gmail account, and I'm going to use Calendly. And then like internally with other teammates, we would like use tools. Oh, I'm going to use a Trello board for this instead of the big software suite that we had bought. And suddenly the IT department isn't this bottleneck and this like central planning source of, control and power that everybody's always waiting on. Everybody in their individual department. Oh, I want my sales team to be able to have a really nice database. Yeah, we'll just get a subscription to Batchbook or Salesforce. And eventually Salesforce, took over everything. And they can just use it, right? And then when they quit, we just kill their subscription. But we got this database. It's all hosted in the cloud. So it just blew everything wide open. And I guess I'll end this history lesson with this analogy. Back in the day, using computing and, software tools for business, it was like, obviously it was better than not having a computer at all. It was great. Huge, huge gain in productivity. But the way that it was done, it was like a planned economy where everything had to be argued and justified and approved by some central body, and it was all hosted under one roof, and they told everybody what they could do, and everyone just had to adapt to whatever the procedure was. Here's our new CRM. You all have to do this and whatever. It was very stifling, and it had very little efficiency, but it was very uniform, right? So it had like very standard procedures that were very stable. They lasted for several years usually. The SaaS revolution comes. Everything's done online. You're paying monthly for all these individualized tools. It's like a free market, a brand new free market. It's like a market that just got free and just opened up, which is innovative, experimental, it's fast, but it's also a little chaotic and disconnected. It's not uniform. How come our marketing team is using Trello for their task management and our sales team is using Asana? We got this guy over here who's using Google Tasks, and none of these things are connected. It's all kind of a mess. You get some of that chaos. And I think what we are moving into now in the last few years, and this is going to be a huge continuing trend, is a mature free market, right? Where, okay, you've unleashed this free market and it's the Wild West. It's great and it's wonderful and crazy, but it's a little chaotic. Now, sort of this co-opetition where it's like, okay, you have this modular, very adaptable, very innovative stack of things you can pick and choose, and from this completely unbundled experience. Everything's totally unbundled. But now you're getting like a rebundling in a much more efficient and adaptable way. It's more modular. It's rebundling, but you're not stuck in this one stagnant bundle with one source of failure and pain points and all that stuff. You still have the modularness, the speed of the unbundled experience, but it's integrating well. Things are playing nicely with each other. And that's where you're getting an incredible, look at all the big winners in the software world in the last, especially 5 years or whatever. They all integrate with each other. Slack, everybody uses Slack in their workplace. Every other software tool they use integrates with Slack. Oh yeah, you want your Trello board, you can just post right to it directly from a Slack channel and vice versa. You want to be able to have, whatever tools you're using, MailChimp can automatically beam stuff into your Slack channel, right? And that's where you're getting this disaggregated stack. It's got the benefits of decentralization, but bringing back some of the benefits. There are benefits of centralization, not centralization at the point of a gun, of course, but centralization in terms of uniformity and things working well together. So that's kind of a history lesson overview of what is SaaS.
So that's great. I've always found that understanding the background really helps. Like if you're going to understand how to develop in computer science or with code, then it helps to actually understand computer science. Like how does it actually work? Because then you can put things together and conceptualize exactly how it should and could work better. So one of the interesting things to me was this idea of unbundling. And I think that this was in Breaking Smart, but he was basically talking about the fact that to some degree, whenever industrialization happened, people were able to have a lot of the things that they had never had before, right? And so it went from this, we don't have everything to we have everything, and now we want customization. And this idea of software being able to offer extreme levels of customization is really, really fascinating to me. So along that line, what is software?
Oh man, you might need to ask somebody a lot smarter than me to get a good definition. I mean, from you can get really metaphysical really quickly. From just like a practical day-to-day standpoint, it's some code that performs certain operations in a consistent, repeatable way, right? And so you package that code together around solving a particular problem, right? Because the computers, they compute, right? Everything they're doing is essentially solving math problems, but you can program all these kind of like logic trees and conditional, statements and things to solve simple tasks. So for example, if you have a spreadsheet, that's your typical, grid, and you want that to be so that if I put a number in 10 cells in a row, and then in the 11th cell below that, I type, sum this cell through this cell and hit enter, I want that to add those together and the result to pop up as the numerical sum of those cells. So I create code. I don't, but people who do this create code that is a set of instructions, what this is supposed to do, what it's supposed to display at the end of that. And you could, of course, make it do anything. You can make it so that when it adds 10 and 10, it displays a picture of a monkey, right? But you program in kind of these rules and these conditions, and to solve specific problems. So like a spreadsheet solves all kinds of problems. It's a really nice tool for planning and budgeting and all kinds of things. So software it's something, it's called soft because it's you can't touch it, right? It's not hard. It is the set of instructions that you're giving to the hardware. You're giving it to a computing machine. Instructions are not physical things. I can speak them to you. I can write them down. I can put them in lots of different ways. But if I give you a set of instructions and I say, every time this happens, I want you to do this. Every time I wink with my left eye, I want you to raise your right hand. Okay. And if you were a computer, if I gave you those instructions and they were clear and well-defined, you'd be incapable of doing anything other than that, right? Which is what's really handy about computers to work with and why they will never take over for humans in all ways. But that's a separate conversation. So it's just a set of instructions that lives on a computer, on a computer machine or a network of machines. And those instructions, if well crafted, make it really, really easy for people to accomplish tasks that would be really, really hard otherwise. Because computers have a lot of advantages in terms of how fast they can, perform simple operations and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe that helps. That's like a really abstract way. In the day-to-day, it's any program or tool that you're using. Zoom that we're on right now, that's a piece of software. Spotify, if you're listening to this on that's a piece of software, right? Sometimes they're called apps because we're sort of that's like a whole different world, but it's essentially the same thing. It's a piece of software. But it's running on the internet, right? It's not stored on your physical machine unless you've downloaded the Spotify app. Then part of it's running on your machine and part of it's running on the internet.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Zoom, Spotify, SaaS. It's all around you, and you don't even realize it. Like that was the biggest.
That's like a Morpheus moment. Like the SaaS is all around you.
No, but really, like I didn't understand that everything around me, all of these tech tools, all of these different things were SaaS through and through. And I think I thought it was like I had separated in my mind startups and Silicon Valley and all of these different things with SaaS, which I don't know why I did. I guess it was because that was easy to understand for me beforehand.
Well, they're all related, right?
Yeah.
Because so there is such a thing as a startup that is not a SaaS startup, right? Mm-hmm. You could have a startup that builds cars or something physical, or you could even have a software startup that is not a SaaS startup. Mm-hmm. There still are some of those, believe it or not, that are building, let's say, a very specific software that they're going to sell and install to like one company, let's say. And it's not like a thing that you go subscribe to online. So, but it just so happens that most SaaS companies are Silicon Valley based venture capital backed startups, most of them that we know of. And that's the most dominant model for a number of reasons. But yeah, and that And the as a service part, by the way, I never fully answered that first question. It's like, why don't you just call it software? Why is it software as a service? Well, because software used to be a product. I mean, you literally would go buy a physical box at Home Depot or whatever, not Home Depot, Office Depot, and you got your, CD in there and you go and install it, right? It was a product, even though it was a set of instructions, as I mentioned, it was on a physical disk and it was a product that you're installing on your computer. Now, as a service is you are not buying a product, you are paying somebody else to solve a problem for you. Now that somebody else happens to be solving it with software, but it's like if I buy a broom to sweep my floor, that's a product. If I pay a cleaning company to sweep my floor, that's a service. Now they're using a broom, but I'm paying them a fee to just perform this task for me instead of buying the tool to do it myself. In software as a service, instead of doing the task myself, let's say managing my calendar and deciding, what to share, what dates to share with people, I pay someone to do that for me and to just create a link that shows everybody my available dates. Now, Calendly might be using software to do that, but it's as a service, right? So it's something that you would traditionally, maybe you would hire a secretary to do that for you. And that's what's amazing with the software growth, is that things that were previously done by humans can be done by software. And so a service you might pay your bookkeeper to do, or your, you might pay a designer to do something that now you could very easily do if you have a subscription to Figma, and you can get on and do some stuff, that you would have had to pay, not necessarily the designer, but let's say somebody who creates, physical, you might have to buy physical products that you would use, like a whiteboard or whatever. So that's the as a service component.
Gotcha. So as a service, there are 3 different types: infrastructure, software, and platform. What is the difference between them?
Where are you pulling that from? That sounds better informed than I am.
So whenever I was starting out, I was like, okay, let me just watch a ton of YouTube videos, and I was just looking up, what is SaaS? SaaS for beginners, SaaS. And what popped up was the difference between infrastructure, software, and platform, but I don't fully understand it still. Like, I don't understand it application-wise.
So I can give you some examples of what I think fits in those buckets, but I'm certainly not the ideal expert, and I may be incorrect in some areas. So infrastructure, like a SaaS, that is considered infrastructure, would be something like AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Bluehost. If you run a WordPress blog and you have it hosted on Bluehost, the service they're providing is the infrastructure, the hosting, right? They're handling hosting all of that in some big server farm somewhere. So that's replacing what used to be that physical computer in a closet or on your desk, that infrastructure sort of layer. Okay, so the other one was, what was the second one before platform?
Software as a service, infrastructure, platform.
Okay, so yeah, so software, we pretty much covered. That's most of these tools that I mentioned. It's like a standalone tool that you're utilizing. QuickBooks, for example, for to do your finances on, or Gusto to run payroll, MailChimp to run your email newsletter. And then platform is where it gets a little bit interesting. And I think it'd be really interesting to get somebody who really knows their stuff when it comes to platform specifically, because that term is kind of broadened out so much now that like everybody says they're building a platform and trying to build a platform. And I'm not necessarily the best to put parameters around that, but an example of a platform would be something like, well, certainly social media platforms, right? So like, let's say LinkedIn, that is a platform in the sense that you have multiple parties who are, the work is almost being done by the user, right? So like the platform is being provided by the company, but the users are doing the work. Or let me try to think of a better example for a company, in a company context. I mean, you could consider Slack a platform, because it's like a chat platform or a communications platform where it's like, here is this thing that it's not a tool that serves a specific use necessarily. It is a platform where people connect all kinds of stuff to it. So they show up and they talk, but they're creating channels, right? They're integrating it to other things, tying it to other components. Could kind of consider Slack, I guess, a platform in that sense. I'm trying to think if I can think of any others. I should have done a little prep on the platforms component, but and then an obvious one would be something like Salesforce, which started as just a software tool. Hey, we'll be a database for your sales team, has become a platform because now Salesforce has like an app exchange where people actually build things on top of Salesforce. So it's this underlying database, and then people will build tools. They'll build SaaS products that live nowhere but on top of Salesforce. Like you can't go use the tool, just stand alone. It's only a tool that you can buy and use on Salesforce because it's built to do something to make Salesforce more valuable by letting it do something. Like for example, if you have your database where you're keeping all your customer information, and then someone builds a tool that says, hey, you subscribe to this SaaS product, and it will take all the information in your database and spit it out into a really cool looking dashboard every week to visualize your how many leads you have and all this kind of stuff, right? That'd be an example of something. And if you have a database like Salesforce is, that makes it easy. They open up their code to an extent for other people to build on top of it. Now it's a platform more than anything. It's like a place where other services live. Other services are built on top of it and other software as a service rather than it just serving a single purpose. Does that help a little?
Mm-hmm. So why would a SaaS tool decide to only build their service on something like Shopify, something like Salesforce? Like why would they limit themselves like that?
Because it's really, really hard to acquire customers. And if you go where the customers already are and you insert yourself at a point in space and time where your customer is most likely to want and value your services, that's going to be your most efficient way to get your product to market. So if you have a service that's like some kind of, let's say it lets people, it lets people pay with crypto in the front end and it pays out in dollars on the back end. Okay, that's a cool service. I want people who want to use Ethereum to buy things to be able to pay with Ethereum, and whoever's selling it will receive it in dollars. That's great. Now, how am I going to go out and get that in front of people? Who's going to pay for this service? Well, the sellers are going to be the ones that are going to have to set it up, right? So the buyers aren't going to be able to do that. So where am I going to find a whole bunch of sellers who are looking for this service? Where are they congregated? Well, most independent sellers are already on Shopify, right? And if I go and try to convince all of them, that's a really inefficient process. I'm direct emailing them. Now people do this, right? I'm trying to advertise to them. And I'm adding work to their life. I'm saying, okay, you're already working with your Spotify, your Shopify, tools and whatever. Now I also want you to use my tool, and your customers will get bounced off of Shopify to do my tool, and then they'll come back. If you can say, what if instead I literally build this as an integration to Shopify, and then all they have to do is click install this integration with one click, right? WordPress is like this. Chrome is like this. If you've ever used a Chrome extension, it's great because you already live on Chrome. You don't have to go off of Chrome to open a new program and then come back to Chrome. It's an extension, right? So if you're already in the back end of your Shopify store, and let's say you get an email from me that says, hey, let people buy your cookies with Ethereum in only one click. Here, install the integration, and you click on it, it takes you to the back end of your Shopify store, and you click install, bada boom, it's right there. And then you can manage it from there. And then there's like a little thing that's like, this add-on is whatever. $10 a month or something, or we take a percentage of each sale or whatever it is. So it's a strategy for the most efficient way to find your customers, the right customer at the right place in the right time. And it just makes sense. I mean, there's so many businesses that literally have no marketing strategy whatsoever, except to be listed as an integration in the right place. And you can build a huge business on that if you're with the right partner.
Gotcha. Okay. So I have some more questions on that, but in order for us to get to the rest of the things that I want to talk about, I'll ask that later. Okay. So teams and roles in SaaS, there's a breakup of different role types, right? You have customer success, marketing, sales, tech, and product. Am I missing anything?
No, I mean, it can get more, there can be all kinds of variations, but I think that's kind of largely the big buckets. Largely the big buckets.
Okay. So let's do a quick breakdown of all of them, starting with customer success.
Okay. Let's start at a different place. Is that okay?
Actually, that's what I was going to say. Let's start with product, probably.
Yeah. So let's start with product. So you had product and tech as two separate things, and they kind of are, right? So there's like your engineering department, which is people who are coding, right? They're writing code, and they could be doing anything from making sure that all the back end infrastructure is right to literally the front end designing what a website looks like. Okay, so you have your engineering team, and then product is like it is engineering, but it's not quite. So you typically have a lot of overlap, and you might have somebody like a product manager who is basically a go-between between the engineering team and all the other departments. Because if you're in the marketing team and you're like, what would really help us market this product is if we had a really cool feature that did this. We need engineering to build that feature, right? And then they're going to go tell engineering, and engineering is going to be like, no, that's stupid. Why would you need that? Why can't you just sell it without that dumb feature? We want to work on this really cool AI thing, right? And sales is going to want a different thing because it's going to make them easier. Oh, when we're trying to close customers, every time we're on the demo, they ask us this. Can we have the product do this? So product is sort of that go-between that says, all right, engineering, let's create a roadmap. What are the features we're going to do? And then everyone has to kind of go through products to say, hey, how do we get our feature that we really want on the roadmap? And then you debate and discuss, and then you look at, well, how much time is that going to take? What's the return on that? If that's going to take 10 weeks of engineering time, is that going to be worth it? Because that 10 weeks could be spent doing this other thing, right? And so product is really trying to help manage. Engineering is this valuable resource, but everything that's built there has to benefit, has to cause the company to grow and or revenue. Otherwise it's wasted, and it's very easy for really smart engineering teams to build awesome stuff that customers don't care about, right? Because it's really hard to know what customers care about. And then, of course, it's really easy if you're not in the engineering team to think you know what engineering should be doing, or to say, oh, it's totally worth it to build this. And you have no idea that building that actually takes like a year, and it's super high risk, right? So product is that go-between. And then you have marketing is everything from the brand and the overall feel of the company. What's the company's name? What's our story? Who's our market? Like, who are we selling to? Can we define that customer sort of from a high level down to the daily of executing the task of making more people aware of us? And so getting in front of potential customers and getting them to go from being a potential customer to being a lead, to being someone who has given us information about themselves. In some way, they have indicated that they are interested in our product, right? And so that's the whole goal. You're trying to convert them from a random person who sees your advertisement or who sees your thing in an app store to someone who has taken an action where you now have contact information on them, and they've been qualified in some sense, that you know that this is a serious potential customer or serious enough that now the sales team gets them, right? Now they kind of go to sales. They're a sales qualified lead, or you have marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead. You'll hear people talk about MQL and SQL. It's different stages of a customer, because remember, not everybody's a potential customer. Like, it's a massive waste of resources to market to the wrong people, right? Like, you don't put a billboard up in the middle of Amish community for a software tool, right? It's not going to do you any good. And if one of those people somehow ends up on your website, having one of your salespeople try to do a demo with them is going to be a waste of resources. So you want to qualify who are the right, get in front of the right people, qualify them. And then the sales team, they are, they're doing everything from sending cold emails to qualified lists of people. Okay, here's a bunch of contacts that I have reason to believe could be good customers of this, to responding to what's called inbound, people who have come on your website and said, oh, I'm interested in this. And maybe they've filled out a form or they've registered for a webinar you're doing, and now you have your email and you know that they're interested in that webinar, right? And so you're going to respond to that. Hey, I saw that you did this. To really big deals, like where you're going to, let's say, a very large company and you're trying to work out some kind of deal with them that might take a year, but it might be worth millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, or a partnership where you're saying, I think that if we combine our product with MailChimp and we offer them as some sort of joint offer, we can increase both of our sales. Let me go work with MailChimp to see if we can do this kind of partner deal. That's like a type of sales as well. And then you kind of have the back office functions, what you might call operations at any company, people that are running payroll, managing, let's say you have offsite events that you're doing with your team and they're scheduling those. There's always a lot of kind of just operational, the business of keeping the lights on in the office, literally, roles. And then customer success. So you've built a great product. Marketing has done a great job getting it out there. People are interested in it and they indicate that somehow and enter your sales funnel. Salespeople reach out to them, show them a demo of the product. They say, this product is great. I'm going to buy it. I'm paying my $90 a month to have it for me and everybody on my team. 2 weeks in, they have a problem with it. They have a question with it. Or you just don't know. You haven't heard from them. You hope they like it, because with the monthly model, you have this thing called churn. They don't like it and they cancel. Well, you've done all that work to recruit that customer, and there's cost involved in the marketing people and the campaigns and all that stuff to get that person to pay you that $90 a month. And then 2 months later, they quit. You've gotten $180 from them, but maybe you've spent $500 acquiring that customer, right? So customer success is everything from proactively, what can we do to keep our customers happy, to engage them? Can we create a sequence of emails for their first 10 days as users that gives them how-tos and tutorials? And then responding like help desk type stuff. Hey, this is broken. What do I do? Oh, customer support, we're here to help you, right? And their goal is to retain the customer, make the customer love them, not just not leave, but love them, and figure out if there's ways for those customers to love them so much that they actually complete the cycle and they go out and brag about it, which is free marketing, or they do referrals for their friends because they love it so much, which is, getting people right into your sales funnel. And that's the ideal, is that your customers will create more customers if you're supporting them well.
So this is the idea of lifetime value, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So lifetime value, or LTV, is essentially the dollar amount that you can say our average customer is worth X amount to us. So let's say you have a $90, $99 a month software tool. So that's, $1,200 a year. And let's say your average churn, your average customer is with you for 24 months. So if that's $1,200 times 2, that's $2,400. Yeah, I did easy numbers, luckily. So instead of 99, we'll call it 100. So I don't have to do all that math with dropping the 1. So let's say your average customer. Some customers will be your customer for 60 months. Some will be your customer for 2 months. But if your average is 24 months long at $99 a piece, right? That's $2,400 LTV. That's the lifetime value per customer. So once you know that, you got to make sure your business model makes sense. Because if it costs you, let's say you've got a really elaborate, sales process. You can spend a lot on marketing. Let's say it costs you $100 to get somebody to give you their email address. So you're putting ads on Facebook every day. You're running webinars and you're creating content for people to download. You're paying a podcast to promote you. And for every, $100 you spend, you get 1 email address. So if you spend $1,000, you get 10 email addresses, right? If you have an average number there. And then that email address, now you've got a salesperson doing a bunch of emails to them, trying to get on a call with them. And maybe that takes, 3 or 4 tries, and it takes a 30-minute call with an entry-level salesperson. And then that goes on to an account executive maybe, or who's doing a demo with them. And you can add up the man hours and the cost of that. And then maybe they become a customer and your customer support. How much does the average customer, how many customer support hours do they consume? What are those employees that are doing those customer support being paid? When you break it out, maybe it costs you $2,300 to recruit and support that customer whose LTV is $2,400, right? So like, that'd be pretty rough, it's a pretty tight window to work in. So this is where you talk about CAC, customer acquisition cost. If it costs you, as I said, $100 to obtain that customer, to get them to become a customer, and their churn is 24 months and $2,400, well, then your CAC to LTV ratio is really freaking good. It's 24 to 1, right? So that's kind of the way that you think about it from a business model standpoint. And this is why, like, these companies, if they're losing money for a while, it doesn't matter if they're venture backed. The goal is if those ratios look good and they're trending in the right direction, and they can say, great, our lifetime value, that's captured over 24 months. We don't get that all at once, but our acquisition cost is paid all up front. So if we say our CAC to LTV, if we get 100 that we spend, we get $2,400 back for that. Well, that's amazing. Let's go raise $100 million and get 1 million customers, right? And we're going to get $2.4 billion on the other end, but that's not going to come till down the road. And we don't want to wait until we get that money in to spend more money on marketing. We want to grow faster. That's kind of the way that, these models will sometimes work. If you see that it makes sense, the cash flow may be delayed, but if you're adding those monthly subscriptions at a fast enough rate and for a low enough cost, it makes sense to go raise a bunch of money and do it even faster.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last two abbreviations that I wanted to go ahead and talk about were MRR and ARR.
And we just, that's a good segue.
Exactly.
MRR is monthly recurring revenue, and ARR is annual recurring revenue. For most SaaS companies, MRR is the big one they'll talk about because they're typically a monthly subscription model. And then ARR is just the, do that times 12, right? Sometimes ARR is different if your model is a once a year charge. It maybe make more sense to do ARR. But MRR, monthly recurring revenue, every time you get a customer and you're charging them $100 a month, now you have added $100 to your monthly recurring revenue. So you got that first customer, now your monthly recurring revenue is $100. Now they could quit, right? They could leave, but that's your MRR. You add another customer, now it's up to 200, right? Now it's 300. Now, so 10 customers, it's 1,000, right? So you have your $1,000 MRR. And then when you add to that, well, our average churn is, X every, 10% of customers quit, and our average time to churn, or average duration of customer is whatever, however many months. And the goal is that those customers will never churn, right? The goal is that they'll stay with you forever, right? Like, how many of us are seriously considering canceling Spotify Premium? It's pretty sticky, pretty good, unless and until a better competitor comes out, right? So, you always have to fight and defend those users. But once you get a user, now you have this reliable, predictable, because before the monthly model, the sales team, it's like they're going out to make a one-time sale over and over and over again. And every month it resets back at zero. With the monthly subscription model, it's like, great, I made a sale. Now that person pays us $100 this month, and next month, and next month, and next month. And it makes your projections and your accounting really nice, because you can kind of see this recurring revenue. The more we grow, it's just adding on to the base that we already built, right? You don't have to keep redoing the work. And so, like, if you can have a subscription model, it's phenomenal. It's killer. And the beauty of it is it scales, right? So the difference between growth and scale, growth is like, if you get more customers, you do more of something and you get more customers, and the inputs required to support and to obtain those customers, they grow with the number of customers. So a typical service business, if you're a accounting firm, for example, and you're doing people's taxes, you can grow. Okay, I'm doing 100 people's taxes. Next year, I'll do 1,000. But to do 1,000 people's taxes, you need 10 times more man hours going in. The beauty of a software company is it can actually scale for the same base inputs. You have to scale some, like your customer success team has to grow somewhat, but it's not one-to-one. Maybe, from 0 to 1,000 customers, like if you have one customer, you're still going to need the same stuff as if you have 10, right? And if you have 10, you're still going to need the same stuff as if you have 1,000. Now, you grow in tranches, but it scales. You get more, you get a multiple for every additional, like software engineer. If they build something once, I build a tool once, now I can sell it on a subscription to people who will pay me every month to use that, and I never have to build it again. I have to support it. I have to fix bugs. I have to add features to it. But it's not like a service where I got to show up and do the job, and it takes an hour of time every time. And if I want to do more, I got to hire more people, right? It's like build it once and then charge people to use it every month. And since it's software, it's a resource that doesn't get depleted. Not in the same way. You can hit certain bandwidth constraints and stuff, but it doesn't get depleted. It's not like selling access to a gym that only so many people can fit into, right? You can only sell so many monthly memberships to that. Software, it's not scarce in the same way. You can sell as many monthly memberships to a software tool as you can. Again, you can hit constraints on the bandwidth side and hosting and that type of thing, but theoretically anyway, in a general sense, it can scale, which is phenomenal.
I like this idea of scaling. It's like finding more ways to use the 80-20 rule. Like the cool thing about software to me is the fact that it's not tied to as many things. So you gave the example of the restaurant. You have hours of operation, you have people, you have goods, like how many food choices are there, is the supply chain messed up, etc. And software, you don't have as many factors to consider constraints.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, and this helps you make decisions for your career. What type of industry do you want to work in? What type of business you want to start? You think about the upside. Let's say you're really interested in food. And this is great. This is not like do what you're passionate about. I'm not at all saying this, but just from a business standpoint, if you think about this, let's say you live in Nashville, Tennessee, and you're really passionate about pastries. Then you could become like the best pastry person in Nashville or in the country or even in the world. And you're going to have your pastry shop, and how much money you can make is completely limited by how many people during the hours that normal humans are awake in one city, how many people can get to Nashville, get into the space that you physically can rent when it's open, and how many pastries can you, as the brilliant chef, who you can't have somebody else make them because you're really brilliant, right? Or maybe you can train them somewhat, but it's going to diminish. How many can you sell every minute you put into making one? You can only sell so many of those, and the price can only go so high. So it's like the best pastry chef in all of a city. What's the maximum number of customers you could get and the maximum dollar per customer, and what does it cost you to support that? Now take somebody who makes, I remember the early days of the iPhone. Somebody made an app, or the App Store was this magical thing. It was called iFart. And it was literally just an app that had like 10 different fart sounds that had different names, like ridiculous, like the wet burrito or whatever. These gross. And of course, I heard about it from a buddy, and it was released around Christmas time. I think it was like the first or second iPhone. And I paid 99 cents to download it. So did about 1 million other people. So some guy one time codes up some funny little app that makes fart sounds and gets it listed on the App Store. And without doing a bit of work besides creating it and uploading it, he makes $1 million. And theoretically, there was no limit. The only limit to how much he could make was how many iPhone users are there? Well, maybe there were like 50 million at the time. And the iPhone users keep growing like this, and people buying apps is growing like crazy. I didn't spend 99 cents on it because I thought that this guy was an artist and this is the most amazing piece of software in the world. I thought it was funny and it was a super easy thing for me to do, and everybody else was doing it, and there was a button to share it with other people. right? So think about how long would it take that pastry chef to make $1 million? They couldn't make $1 million. This person made $1 million like in Christmas weekend, right? So you think about the sheer power and scale of software. If you have, especially if you're connected to a platform like that, if it has things that are shareable, if there's a network effect where each user makes every other user's use more valuable, you can do something. If you're in a big enough market with enough momentum, you can do something mediocre. Like, what could you do that people would pay you $2 a month for? Think about that. And how many people would pay you $2 a month for that? Can you find a way to get out to them with that versus, I'm the best masseuse in the world. I'm only going to be able to massage so many backs. You know what I mean? And there's a limit to how much I can charge, et cetera. So the scale of this stuff is incredible, which is why you probably want to go work for a company that has a business model like that, because the upside and the growth is huge.
And before we wrap up, not only for the person that's starting this company, for the person that's starting this business, like say the pastry chef that's amazing. The pastry chef that's amazing is going to have to price her items very high. And then the only people that will be able to enjoy her items are the people that are able to pay that much money for it. And the cool thing about software as a service that I've seen is you can have these premium products. And because it's spread out over a 12-month period or a per month basis, you can have premium products that normal people can use, normal people can utilize. And then you have this cool network effect of really great products.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can lose money for a long time, as I said, if you know the market's big enough. In a pastry business, you have to cover your costs. Like there's a minimum cost per item that you make, and you have to charge at least that much, or else you'll burn all your money and go out of business. With software, and again, there's not really a way to scale it. With software, and this is why people raise venture capital, if the market's huge, I can say, look, I'm going to give this away for free for like 5 years until I have 10 million people using it for free, and I'm losing money every time. But then once I have 10 million people, I'll have the power to say, hey, I'm going to offer a premium tier, and maybe 10% of those users will do that, and that's 1 million people, and maybe they'll pay me $2 a month. Well, that's $2 million a month, or $10 a month. That's $10 million a month. That's $120 million a year in revenue. And that makes up for having no revenue for 5 years, right? Because I can see, and like Facebook did this a lot. I mean, Twitter did this. It was like, hey, there's something here. If it's huge, and then it becomes a part of everyone's life and everyone has to be on it, now you can monetize in a lot of different ways. Whereas a pastry, you can't grow like that. Like you had to charge a minimum price from day one. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool things you can do because the scale is so big. And it doesn't mean those things always work. I mean, the majority of software companies fail. The majority of them that try this, it's really hard to do, but the possibilities are endless. And I'll throw in one more thing because I know we're wrapping up. The other revolution of SaaS is the cost of being an entrepreneur plummeted. You think about if you wanted to start a technology company, certainly prior to the sort of SaaS revolution, to the internet being able to handle all this, unbundled stuff and stream things, you would have to build things, like physically build things, right? Like you'd have to, if you wanted to offer a sales database tool, you had to first like have a massive bunch of computers yourself. You had to have a whole bunch of stuff. Like the infrastructure you need to build, you need to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars because you need to have servers and all this other stuff. Now, a startup, like they used to say 500,000 is the new 5 million because you used to need $5 million like pre-product to get a product, to even get the research and development to get it started. And then it's like, oh, now it's $500,000. Now it's literally like $500. I mean, you can start building a market before you've even touched a product. You can say, okay, I'm going to get a microphone for $79 and I'm going to get a YouTube channel for free. And I'm going to create a podcast, called Managing Your Day with a Better Technique for, to-do lists or calendar management. And you can start a newsletter and a podcast about calendar management techniques and get a bunch of people, hey, this is really cool. And they're tweeting about, you're like the guru of calendar management. And then you use a bunch of no code tools. You go and use, you know, Airtable and you know, WordPress blog or whatever to create, hey, I created my first little task management tool. And it's I'll charge $20, you get to buy it and use it for life. And now you're selling a product. And now maybe you get 1,000 people to buy that and you're like, huh, I'm going to make a custom version of this. I've already got revenue. I've already got customers. I'm going to go raise like $100,000 to get a full-time coder to build it in 6 months and get it out to market. Like that stuff is all possible. That was never possible before. It had to be like massively big, which is why it was only people with like a lot of connections to old money from the networks of like the Ivy League schools and stuff. Now it's like incredibly easy to experiment, and you can have all kinds of stuff. You can have a little product like an app on the iPhone store that maybe you make a few bucks off here and there, and then you can go start another thing. And if one of them takes off, you can go raise a bunch of money and go really big. It's just amazing. The opportunity is incredible.
It is. It just takes execution. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this episode. I was really grateful for you coming on and sharing everything that you've learned about SaaS over the years. It's the perfect introductory episode, I think. My goal with this podcast is kind of to talk to professionals in the space, ask them a lot of questions, kind of get my understanding of what goes on in each role and with SaaS on this macro level. And so this is a great place to start because it's like, all right, let's zoom out and then we'll zoom in, and then maybe eventually we'll continue doing that, zoom out and zoom in. And yeah, so I was really, really grateful for you going on. Thank you.
Well, go on is definitely what I tend to do. So you gave me a long leash and I talked a lot.
No, it was perfect. Like, this is exactly what I wish I would have had in the very beginning whenever I had started.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had too. You know, I saw these things unfolding, but it didn't really get it, didn't really know what it was. Like I've learned the hard way and later than I should have a lot of this stuff as I've gone. But it's, you know, again, it's one of those things. I think it's easy to not understand the world that we're immersed in sometimes because we're too close to it, and to really like the things that you're using every day, like Zoom. Oh yeah, somebody built that. They have a business model. How did they get me as a customer? Did they do that on purpose, or was that like luck? Am I paying them for this? How are they making money for this, right? Who's supporting this? Do they have investors? Are they like, start asking those questions about all the things you're using in the world. Every time you get online, every time you interact with something, and you'll start to unlock some pretty amazing things. And that's where you'll find opportunity for yourself.
Yep. Well, thank you again.